Scene 1, INTRO, The Bus Ride. Narrator, warm, curious tone. The bus rumbled down the old, winding road, its tires eating up the paved path that cut through a dense forest of towering pines. Trees flickered past like old memories, their shadows stretching across the faded asphalt. Eli sat by the window, his fingers lightly drumming against the plastic ledge, the vibrations tickling the edges of his nerves. The road ahead seemed endless, and his thoughts, tangled in the hum of the engine, felt just as distant. It wasn't nerves, exactly. Maybe it was anticipation, or was it just the weight of something larger, something undefined, pressing in on him? His eyes slid past the scenery, taking in the mountains in the distance, the sun already dipping low enough to cast long shadows across the fields. The world outside was growing dimmer, and inside, his thoughts were just as murky. This was it. Paintball Camp. It wasn't a last-minute decision. It had been months of hesitating before he finally took the plunge. But now that he was here, traveling on the bus with a bunch of strangers, the weight of the decision felt more real. His fingers tightened around the strap of his bag, as if that small act could ground him in a sea of uncertainty. He had to admit, the thought of it was appealing at first, the chance to prove himself, the competition, the rush of adrenaline that came with every shot. Eli wasn't the most physically gifted, but he had something else. He had patience. At least, that's what he told himself. He wasn't a stranger to challenges, he'd been through enough of those. But was this really what he needed? He wasn't sure anymore. The other campers on the bus didn't seem to be nearly as deep in thought. Luis, who was sitting a row behind him, was already chatting excitedly, his voice carrying over the low murmur of the engine. Man, you know I'm gonna dominate out there. I've been practicing every weekend. Maya, sitting in the front row, was quieter, her nose buried in a worn journal, scribbling furiously as the words seemed to pour out of her like water rushing from a stream. Eli couldn't make out her handwriting from this distance, but there was something familiar about the way she wrote, intentional, focused, as if she already had a goal in mind. Unlike him, she always seemed so sure of herself, even when things around her were uncertain. But that was the difference between them, wasn't it? Maya knew what she wanted, and Eli had spent too long wondering if what he wanted was even real. He shifted in his seat, the leather of the bus's interior squeaking under his weight. Was it too late to turn back? He glanced out the window again, seeing only more trees, more of the same stillness that seemed to swallow him wherever he went. Yet there was something about this camp, something about the idea of competing, that tugged at him. Maybe it was the test. Maybe it was the faith. Paintball wasn't just about running through an obstacle course or tagging the other team. It was about proving something to yourself. At least, that's what Eli kept telling himself. The older man at the front of the bus, the one who would be guiding them through the week, turned around, offering a warm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. You all ready for camp? Ready to get dirty? His voice was loud enough to break the quiet murmur of the other campers. They all glanced at him, nodding or giving half-hearted cheers. Eli felt a slight wave of embarrassment sweep over him. How could he be ready? Was anyone ever really ready for something like this? A test of skill, of endurance, but also something deeper. The man, who Eli learned was Pastor Ruby, seemed to catch Eli's hesitation and gave him an understanding nod. You'll find that you're stronger than you think, Ruben said, his voice softer this time, as though he had a deeper understanding of the silent battle Eli was fighting in his mind. But you need to trust in yourself first. That's where it starts. The bus hit a bump, jolting Eli back to the moment. He breathed in deeply, as though trying to expel the tension that had wound its way into his chest. Ruben's words lingered, but they didn't do much to settle the storm of doubt in Eli's mind. He wasn't sure if he could trust himself. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, this camp would give him the chance to find out. The night was falling fast, and the trees began to darken, their outlines becoming silhouettes against the dimming sky. A chill settled in the air, a reminder that they were still a long way from the comforts of home. Eli glanced down at his Bible, tucked neatly in his bag. A small, weathered thing, it had been with him through more than he could count. Some would say it was just a book, something to read when things got tough. But to Eli, it was more than that. It was a guide, a way to remind him that he was never really alone. And if he him finally see things the way he was supposed to? The bus rolled on, its engine humming like a heartbeat as the world outside faded into darkness. The bus finally rolled to a stop, the tires crunching against the gravel of the camp's driveway. The headlights cut through the dark, revealing the sprawling camp ahead. Tall trees loomed over the cabins and tents, casting long shadows across the ground. Eli could see other campers unloading their gear, some laughing, others moving with quiet determination. The air smelled crisp, the scent of pine mixed with the faint scent of campfire smoke in the distance. "All right, everyone out." Pastor Reuben's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "You find your cabins and get settled. We'll gather for a quick orientation in about an hour. Make sure you're ready. This camp is as much about the mind as it is about the body. So, leave your doubts at the door and step up to the challenge." Eli stood, his legs stiff from the long ride, and grabbed his bag. He could feel the weight of it more than usual as he moved toward the door. The other campers filed out around him, all talking excitedly, but he just felt detached. This was supposed to be a chance to prove something, but he wasn't sure what that was yet. He stepped off the bus, his boots crunching on the gravel as he looked around. The camp had a rustic charm, with its weathered cabins, open fields, and small pond in the distance. It was the kind of place that made you think you'd wandered into another time. Out here, there was no rush, no distractions, just nature and the people around you. "Hey, Eli." Maya's voice broke through his thoughts, and he turned to see her jogging up to him. "You heading to the cabins? I'll show you where mine is." Eli nodded, trying to muster a smile. "Sure. Lead the way." Maya grinned and started walking, Eli falling into step behind her. As they passed the other cabins, he couldn't help but notice the different groups of campers, all looking a bit like him, nervous, unsure, but also hopeful. He could hear snippets of conversation as they moved past, but most of it didn't make much sense. Talk of strategies, tactics, past experiences. It all felt so foreign to him. "So," Maya said, breaking the silence, "you nervous?" Eli hesitated. "A little." Maya raised an eyebrow, but her smile remained. "It's okay. You'll get the hang of it. I mean, it's just paintball, right?" Eli nodded, though he wasn't entirely convinced. "Yeah, but it's not just about the game, is it?" Maya's smile faltered for a moment, and she glanced at him, her expression more serious than before. "No, I guess it's not. There's something else to it. There's always something else." She fell silent then, and Eli could sense she was lost in her own thoughts. They reached a small cabin, and Maya gestured toward it. "This is mine. I'll see you at orientation, yeah?" "Yeah," Eli said, though he wasn't entirely sure what he would find at orientation. What could they really tell him that would change anything? He turned and made his way toward the cabin he had been assigned, the door creaking open as he stepped inside. It was small but comfortable, with 2 bunks on each side and a small window that overlooked the campgrounds. He threw his bag on the bottom bunk and sat down on the edge, running a hand through his hair. Was he really ready for this? Was anyone? The quiet of the cabin surrounded him, and he felt the weight of the Bible in his bag once again. Without thinking, he pulled it out and flipped through the pages, letting his fingers trace the words. It wasn't so much the words themselves, though they had always comforted him. It was the sense of grounding that came with it. A reminder that, no matter what happened, he wasn't facing this alone. His fingers landed on a familiar verse, one he had read many times before. James 1 verses 2 to 4. The words seemed to stand out more than usual now, almost as if they were meant for this very moment. "My brethren, count it all joy when ye fall into divers temptations, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. But let patience have her perfect work, that ye may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing." Eli closed the Bible, his heart beating a little faster. Patience, trust, endurance. These weren't just words, they were the foundation of everything he had ever learned. And now, they were his anchor here. They had to be. This camp, this challenge, it wasn't just about winning. It wasn't just about being better than the others. It was about proving something to himself. He wasn't sure what it would take, but he knew he had to give it his all. There was a knock at the door, and Pastor Reuben stepped in, his expression calm and understanding. "Eli," he said gently, "it's time for orientation. You ready?" Eli nodded, standing up slowly. "Yeah, let's do it." As Eli followed Pastor Reuben toward the campfire area, a soft breeze rustled the leaves around them. The path was lit by a string of lanterns that flickered against the growing darkness, casting an ethereal glow across the camp. The smell of wood smoke and pine mixed in the air, grounding Eli in the present moment. For once, his mind didn't race as much. He simply focused on the sound of his boots crunching along the gravel path. The campfire area was a short distance from the cabins, a circular clearing surrounded by logs and stumps serving as seats. A few campers had already gathered, chatting among themselves, their voices barely audible over the crackling fire in the center. The flames flickered brightly, illuminating the faces of the campers who were drawn to the warmth. Eli noticed Luis and Maya among them, laughing, their animated voices contrasting sharply with the calm that seemed to have settled on Eli's shoulders. Pastor Reuben motioned for Eli to join the group, and Eli slid onto an empty log next to Maya. She flashed him a quick grin before returning her attention to Pastor Reuben, who was now standing in front of the fire. "All right, everyone," Pastor Reuben began, his voice carrying effortlessly across the clearing. The campfire danced behind him, creating a silhouette of the older man's form. "Welcome to Paintball Camp. Some of you may be here for the game. Some of you may be here for the challenge. But I can tell you this, you'll be tested in ways you didn't expect." Eli felt a small shiver run through him, though it wasn't from the cool evening air. The tone in Pastor Reuben's voice wasn't ominous, it was simply a matter of fact. This camp wasn't just about the game, it was about something deeper, something that lay beneath the surface of each individual's experience. This week, Pastor Reuben continued, "You'll face obstacles. Some will be physical, others mental. And yes, some will test your faith. But through each trial, there's an opportunity for growth. Just as in paintball, when you're out on the field, you'll be challenged to trust yourself, your team, and something bigger than yourself." Maya shifted next to Eli, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp, taking in every word. Eli couldn't help but notice the firelight reflecting in her eyes. There was a certain calm to her that he hadn't expected, especially not from someone who had seemed so excitable earlier. She was absorbing everything, preparing for what was to come. "Now," Pastor Reuben said, taking a step back and clapping his hands together, "let's talk about the rules of the camp, the expectations, and how we're going to break into teams." Eli listened attentively as the pastor explained the camp schedule. There would be drills in the morning, tactical exercises, aiming practices, and team-building activities. Afternoons would focus on real games, where strategy and patience would be tested. There was something about the way Pastor Reuben spoke, though, that made Eli feel like this wasn't just about the drills and the matches, it was about something more. Like the paintball wasn't just paint, it was a reflection of something deeper within each of them. There will be days, Pastor Reuben continued, when you'll want to give up, when you'll question whether you have what it takes. But remember, this is about more than just the game. It's about perseverance, about finding strength when you don't think you have any left. When that moment comes, ask yourself, what do you truly believe? What are you willing to fight for? Eli's heart beat faster at the question. What did he believe? He wasn't sure. He had always believed in the idea of being a good person, of being patient and understanding. But out here, in the midst of this competition, could those ideals still hold weight? Could they guide him through the challenges that lay ahead? Pastor Reuben clapped his hands again, bringing the attention back to him. "All right, campers. Tomorrow we begin. Make sure you get a good night's sleep. You're going to need it." As the group began to disperse, Eli felt a sense of both calm and anticipation settle within him. The camp was more than just a game. It was a test of character, a test of who they really were. Maya stood up and stretched. "Ready for tomorrow?" she asked, her voice light but filled with an edge of determination. Eli looked up at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I think so. You'll be fine," she said with a confident nod. "Just remember what he said about trusting yourself. And trust me, you've got this." words felt comforting, and they sparked something inside him. Maybe this wasn't about being the best. Maybe it was about proving something to himself, not just through the game, but through how he handled the challenges that came with it. The fire crackled softly as the last of the campers made their way back to the cabins, leaving Eli and Maya alone by the fire. The flickering light danced in the shadows, and for a moment, Eli felt like he was seeing things with a new clarity. "This is going to be harder than I thought," Eli admitted quietly, his voice carrying just enough for Maya to hear. She gave him a sideways glance. "Yeah, but it'll be worth it." Eli took a deep breath, feeling the night air fill his lungs. He didn't know if he was ready, but something told him he had to be. The next few days would change him, he knew it. The night passed quickly, and before Eli knew it, the first rays of dawn began to pierce through the cracks in the cabin's wooden walls. The air was cool, and a light mist hovered over the ground outside. Eli's alarm clock blared, pulling him out of a restless sleep. He groaned and rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the fatigue from the previous day. The camp hadn't been what he expected. There had been tension in the air, a palpable sense that something bigger than just the competition was happening. With a reluctant sigh, he swung his legs over the edge of the bunk and stood. The cabin creaked as he moved across the wooden floor. The silence of the morning seemed almost oppressive, and he felt a gnawing sense of unease. What was he doing here? Was he really cut out for this? After a few moments of contemplation, he shook his head, trying to dismiss the doubt. Patience. Endurance. Trust. The words from James 1 verses 2 to 4 echoed in his mind once again. The trials ahead were not just about the game, they were about how he handled the challenges that would come. He had to trust in the process, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. Eli quickly dressed, throwing on his camp-issued gear, dark green cargo pants and a fitted shirt with the camp's logo on it. He checked his watch. Time was running short. He needed to be at the gathering area soon. He grabbed his gear bag, slung it over his shoulder, and stepped out of the cabin into the crisp morning air. The camp was already waking up. A few campers were already heading to the mess hall, chatting with each other as they walked. The sound of clattering pots and the smell of brewing coffee filled the air. Eli made his way toward the mess hall, but his thoughts were elsewhere. As he walked, he noticed Maya walking a few steps ahead, talking with Luis and a couple of other campers. Her laughter floated back to him, light and carefree, but when she turned and saw him, her face softened. She gave him a small wave, which he returned with a tentative nod. By the time Eli made it to the mess hall, the buzz of conversation filled the space. The long tables were covered with plates of eggs, bacon, and toast, with pitchers of juice and coffee on the sides. He grabbed a plate and took a seat near the back of the room. He wasn't sure if he was ready for the day ahead, but he knew there was no turning back now. Pastor Reuben stood at the front of the room, his presence commanding attention despite his calm demeanor. As the campers settled into their seats, he raised a hand to silence the chatter. "Good morning," Pastor Reuben said, his voice steady. "Today is the first full day of camp, and it will be a day of preparation. We'll be breaking into teams and starting with some basic drills. You'll get a chance to hone your skills, both individually and as a group." Eli chewed slowly on a piece of toast, listening. His stomach was tight with nerves, but he was trying to push through. He couldn't afford to get distracted. This was what he'd signed up for, and he had to see it through. "Now," Pastor Reuben continued, "I know you're all excited to jump into the action. But remember this, it's not just about the game. It's about learning, growing, and becoming stronger than you were yesterday. Today, you'll focus on the basics, communication, strategy, and how to move as a team." Eli took a deep breath and looked around the room. Maya was sitting a few seats away, nodding along with Pastor Reuben's words. Luis, who had been part of the conversation earlier, was laughing with a group of other campers, but Eli could sense the tension in the room. They were all here to prove something. And for some of them, it wasn't just about winning the game. It was about something more personal. Something they were still figuring out, just like Eli. After breakfast, we'll meet at the field for our first drills. So, finish up your meal and get ready, Pastor Reuben said, signaling the end of his talk. Remember, we're all in this together. Lean on each other. Trust each other. You'll go further than you think. Eli pushed his plate away and stood, feeling a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. He wasn't sure if he was ready for the drills or the challenges ahead, but he had no choice. He had to be. Patience, trust, endurance. The words came back again, and for the first time since he'd arrived, Eli felt like they meant something deeper than just surviving this camp. Maybe this was about finding out who he really was and what he could become. The campers made their way out of the mess hall and toward the training field, the morning sun now fully risen and casting long shadows on the ground. Eli fell in step with Maya and Luis, their conversation light but with an undercurrent of excitement. The air was filled with the sound of footsteps, laughter, and the distant calls of birds. It was the calm before the storm. When they reached the field, they saw several instructors waiting by the edge of the forest. Each one had a marker, signaling the start of the drills. There was a palpable sense of energy in the air as the campers grouped together. The atmosphere had shifted. What had been a nervous tension was now focused determination. We'll begin with some basic exercises, one of the instructors, a tall, athletic woman with short-cropped hair, said. We'll work on team coordination, positioning, and communication. It's important to get comfortable with the basics before we move on to anything too advanced. Eli could see the other campers sizing each other up, silently assessing who they wanted to be on their teams. There was no clear leader yet, but Eli knew the group dynamic. The sharp sound of the whistle echoed across the field, cutting through the early morning silence. Eli's heart rate quickened, but he forced himself to focus. He watched as the other campers began to move, falling into formation under the watchful eyes of the instructors. All right, team, the instructor called. We're starting with basic movement drills. Each of you will need to communicate your position clearly and stay aware of your surroundings. Work together as a unit. If you move too quickly, you leave your teammates exposed. If you hesitate, you risk getting caught off guard. Eli glanced around, the reality of the situation settling in. He wasn't just playing a game of paintball. This was about working as a team, building trust, and learning how to navigate a hostile environment with others by your side. The stakes were higher than he had expected. Let's pair up, the instructor called. You'll start by moving from one end of the field to the other. One of you will lead, the other will cover. Move quickly, but stay low and stay in communication. Eli was paired with Luis, a natural choice since they had already been talking the most in the mess hall. They exchanged a brief look, both understanding the weight of the task ahead. Luis was fast, but he had a tendency to rush ahead without fully assessing the situation. Eli knew he would need to be the steady hand, the one who thought through every move before acting. The whistle blew again, signaling the start of the drill. Eli crouched low and moved into position beside Luis, who was already crouched and looking ahead, scanning the field. The first part of the drill was simple, move from one end of the field to the other without being caught. Luis nodded at Eli, signaling that he was ready to move. Eli mirrored his movements, staying close and keeping his eyes peeled for any signs of movement in the distance. They moved quickly, but cautiously, sliding from one cover to the next, using trees and large rocks to shield their bodies. The forest was thick with trees, the shadows deepening as they passed, making it easy to hide, but harder to see what might be lurking just beyond the next turn. Stay low, Eli whispered to Luis, his voice barely audible above the sound of their footsteps. We need to cover each other's blind spots. Don't rush ahead. Luis shot him a quick, almost dismissive glance, but nodded. He understood the importance of coordination, even if he wasn't the best at following orders. Eli didn't mind. He was used to being the one to play it safe. It felt strange, but comforting, to be the one giving instructions. As they neared the halfway point of the field, Eli signaled for Luis to stop. They crouched behind a thick bush, listening for any sounds that might suggest an opponent was nearby. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. There was nothing, just the rustling of leaves in the wind. Luis looked impatient, clearly wanting to move forward. Eli gave him a nod, signaling it was time to go. They moved together, making it halfway across the field without issue. But just as they were about to pass behind a large boulder for cover, the whistle blew. The drill was over. They had completed the task successfully. Good job, the instructor called, nodding in approval. You moved efficiently. But remember, always communicate. You're only as strong as your weakest link. Eli exhaled, letting go of the tension that had built up in his shoulders. He glanced at Luis, who wore a grin on his face. You did good back there, Luis said with a thumbs up. Eli smiled back, feeling a small sense of pride. It wasn't just about getting across the field, it was about working as a team and staying focused on the bigger picture. The rest of the campers completed their drills with varying degrees of success. Some moved smoothly, others struggled with coordination. Eli watched as Maya worked with another camper, her movements sharp and decisive. She was clearly a natural at this, and it was clear that she'd been honing her skills long before this camp. As the morning progressed, the drills grew more complicated. They transitioned to tactical exercises, where the teams had to cover more ground, take strategic positions, and simulate combat situations. Eli's team struggled at times, especially when they tried to coordinate their movements while under simulated attack. Luis, in particular, had trouble staying calm when things got intense, often breaking formation to make an aggressive move. Hold your position. Eli barked at one point, frustration creeping into his voice. Stay behind cover. Let them come to us. But Luis didn't seem to hear him. He darted out from behind cover, charging toward the enemy team without a plan. Eli cursed under his breath, his instincts screaming that they were about to lose this drill. Luis, no! Eli shouted, but it was too late. Luis was already exposed, and the enemy team took the opportunity to fire their simulated paintballs. Luis was hit, and the exercise was called off. The instructor blew her whistle sharply. You're out, Luis. You've got to think before you act. Communication is key, and so is patience. Luis walked back to their side of the field, his shoulders slumped. Eli approached him, trying to hide his frustration. Why'd you go out there? Eli asked quietly. We were winning. You can't just charge in like that. Luis shot him a glance. I thought I could make the play. Thought I could get the shot in before they had a chance to react. Eli shook his head. It's not just about getting the shot. It's about playing as a team. We can't do it if we don't trust each other to stick to the plan. Luis didn't respond immediately, but Eli could tell the words had hit home. There was no immediate apology, but there was something in Luis's posture that suggested he was rethinking his approach. The rest of the morning went by quickly, with more drills and exercises focused on honing their skills. By the time lunch rolled around, Eli felt both mentally and physically drained. His muscles ached, and his mind buzzed with the intensity of the morning. But he also felt a sense of accomplishment. He had survived the first set of challenges, and despite the missteps, he had learned something valuable. As they gathered in the mess hall for lunch, the campers were quieter than usual, their faces a mix of exhaustion and reflection. Maya sat down across from Eli, offering him a smile. You did good, she said. You kept your cool even when things weren't going your way. Eli felt a small surge of pride. Thanks. But we still have a lot to work on. She nodded. We all do. But that's what this is about, right? Growing. Learn Chapter 4, The Patience of Endurance. The afternoon session was tougher than the morning, with the drills becoming more intense. Eli had already learned that patience was as much a part of the game as speed and accuracy. As the teams were split into groups for simulated battle scenarios, Eli's nerves were on edge, but he found himself less anxious than before. The more they practiced, the more the concept of trusting the process, of trusting his team, took root. All right, everyone, the instructor called, standing in front of them with a serious expression. We're moving into something more complicated now. This time, you'll have to be strategic. You need to defend a position, but you won't know where the opposition is coming from until you're already engaged. Your goal is to outthink and outlast. Trust your team. Trust your instincts. Eli's mind raced as the instructor gave them the rules. They were tasked with defending a fortified position against the other campers, but they wouldn't know where the attacks would come from. They'd have to rely on their communication, their ability to stay calm under pressure, and their understanding of the field itself. Luis, still visibly frustrated from earlier, was assigned to Eli's team again. Eli had seen the disappointment in his eyes earlier, but now there was a resolve about it. He nodded at Eli as they gathered in their positions, his face more focused than it had been all morning. "I'm with you," Luis said, and for the first time, Eli felt he meant it. They set up their defenses, taking cover behind thick brush, stacked tires, and even some of the wooden crates that had been set up by the instructors. Eli found a good spot near a large rock where he could see the field and cover their flank. "Remember what we practiced," Eli said quietly. "We don't know when they'll attack. Stay low, keep your head down, and whatever happens, don't panic." Luis nodded, his lips tight as he prepared his gear. The rest of the team spread out, each of them watching the various pathways leading into the defensive zone. Eli felt the familiar weight of responsibility on his shoulders, but this time, he wasn't carrying it alone. There was a unity in their positioning that made him feel hopeful. The first whistle blew, signaling the start of the exercise. The air seemed to freeze for a moment as everyone tensed, listening for the sound of approaching footsteps or the subtle snap of a twig. "Stay still," Eli whispered, watching the horizon for any signs of movement. Minutes passed, stretching out like hours. Eli kept his eyes trained on the forest beyond, aware of every shift in the wind, every rustle in the trees. He had to remain patient. His pulse quickened every time he heard something in the distance, but he held his breath and waited. Suddenly, the faint sound of footsteps reached his ears. His heart skipped. The enemy was approaching. "Get ready," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "They're coming." Luis, a few meters away, gave him a quick nod. The sounds of movement grew louder, and then, crack. The unmistakable sound of a paintball gun fired from the forest. "Incoming!" Eli shouted, his voice sharp. He ducked behind his cover, instinctively reaching for his own paintball gun. The attack was sudden and swift. Eli's team had barely a moment to react before paintballs began to splatter against their defenses. They scrambled for cover as the other team charged forward from multiple directions. Eli aimed his gun carefully, his finger poised on the trigger. He fired, watching as the bright splashes of color marked his targets. A successful hit on one of the attacking campers filled him with a brief sense of relief. They were holding their ground, but it was clear that this wasn't just about shooting. The real test was staying organized under pressure. Luis had already moved to another position, darting to the right to avoid being hit. Eli spotted him and watched as Luis took aim at one of the attackers moving on their left. The paintball hit the target, a perfect shot, and Eli could see the satisfaction in Luis's eyes. This was the Luis Eli had been waiting for, the calm, the focus, the patience. Eli heard a shout from the other side of the field, a member of their team calling for backup. He didn't hesitate. He signaled to Luis, and the two of them moved in sync, rushing to reinforce the team's weakened side. "Watch your left," Eli warned, his voice steady but urgent. Luis gave a quick nod and focused on the attackers approaching from the trees. Eli moved with precision, his eyes scanning the surroundings, keeping track of every angle. As they approached the defensive zone, Eli crouched low, staying as hidden as possible, and then, boom! Another paintball shot splattered against the tree just beside him. They were getting closer. The enemy was almost on top of them. The pressure intensified as the attackers closed in, forcing Eli's team to abandon their initial position and reposition themselves near the center of the field. It wasn't ideal, but it was their only option. "Fall back!" The instructor shouted, and the team quickly moved into defensive positions at the new location. The game dragged on for what felt like an eternity. Every few minutes, the enemy team would move in for another push, testing the defenders' resolve. Paintballs flew across the field, some barely missing their targets, while others splattered against trees, rocks, and makeshift barricades. Finally, as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, signaling the end of the session, the instructor blew the whistle again. The exercise was over. "Good job, everyone," the instructor called, his voice ringing out across the field. "You defended your position well, but remember, the real test is not just your ability to fight back. It's your ability to stay patient and calm, to trust your teammates and stay organized under pressure." Eli stood up slowly, his muscles aching, but there was a sense of pride in his chest. They had done it. They had worked together, supported each other, and stuck to the plan, no matter how intense the pressure had gotten. It wasn't just about shooting, it was about knowing when to act. when to wait, and when to trust those around you. Luis clapped Eli on the back, his face a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. "We made it," he said, a smile breaking through his tired expression. Eli grinned back, feeling a genuine sense of accomplishment. "We did." As the campers gathered their gear and walked back to the mess hall, the sky above them was painted with the warm colors of the setting sun. Eli could feel the sweat on his brow and the tiredness in his bones, but there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that every challenge, every moment of discomfort, had brought them one step closer to the goal. "The trying of your faith worketh patience." The words rang in his mind once again. The day had been a test of endurance, but in the end, it was about much more than just the game. It was about the strength that came from pushing through the hard moments, from trusting his teammates, and from allowing patience to guide his every move. Eli was starting to understand something deeper about the camp, about paintball, and about life. Sometimes, the greatest victories came not from the fast, decisive moments, but from the slow, steady buildup of trust, patience, and endurance. And he was just getting started. Chapter 5, The Crucible of Character. The evening following the drill, the camp was quiet except for the crackling of the campfire that provided a comforting warmth against the growing chill of the night air. The campers had gathered around the fire, exhausted from the day's activities but united by a shared experience. They were more than just a team, they were slowly becoming a community. As Eli sat down on a log near the fire, his body ached, but the sense of accomplishment still lingered. He could feel the weariness of the day settling into his bones, but it wasn't just physical fatigue. Something deeper had shifted within him, something he couldn't quite explain yet. Perhaps it was the lesson that patience, the ability to endure, and the reliance on others had brought him. Whatever it was, he was beginning to understand that this camp was about more than paintball. It was about shaping his character, strengthening his resolve, and learning to trust in the process. Luis sat next to him, wiping the sweat and paint off his face with the back of his hand. Despite his initial frustrations, the day had seemed to have calmed his nerves. The game had brought out a different side of him, a more focused, determined version that Eli was beginning to appreciate. "That was something," Luis said, his voice low as he stared into the fire. "I didn't think I could do it. I didn't think I could keep my head on straight with everything going on, but we pulled it off." Eli nodded, leaning back on the log. "It wasn't easy, but we got through it. The key is that we stayed together. We kept talking, even when things got chaotic. We didn't panic." Luis looked at him, his expression thoughtful. "I guess I didn't realize how much trust you have to have in people during something like that. I thought it was just about being fast, about getting the shots in first. But it's more than that, isn't it?" Eli smiled, a little relieved to hear Luis finally beginning to get it. "Yeah, it's about patience. It's about staying calm, keeping an eye on the bigger picture. You can't just rush into things. You have to wait for the right moment, then strike. Same with the team. You can't win alone. You need to trust the people around you." Luis nodded again, this time with more conviction. "You're right. I've been fighting this camp, fighting the process. But I think I'm starting to understand what you mean. The game, it's about patience. Not just patience in waiting for the enemy, but patience with yourself. I guess that's something I could use." Eli turned to him, recognizing the change in his tone. Luis wasn't just venting frustrations anymore. He was processing, learning, and adapting. This was the beginning of something deeper than just mastering paintball tactics. It was about growth, personal growth. "I think we all could use a little patience," Eli replied, chuckling. "It's not just about what you're doing out there on the field. It's about how you handle everything. The way you react when things don't go as planned. How you stay steady when the world is spinning out of control." As the fire crackled and popped, Eli's thoughts turned inward. It had been a difficult day, but it had also been a pivotal one. They had faced uncertainty, confusion, and stress, and had come out stronger on the other side. This was more than just a team-building exercise. This was a lesson in life. Patience wasn't just a virtue for the field, it was a necessity for life itself. It was the quiet endurance that allowed them to push through their challenges. The ability to wait for the right moment, the strength to hold firm when things seemed impossible, the courage to trust others when everything seemed uncertain. The warmth of the fire seemed to amplify the stillness of the night, making Eli feel more connected to everything around him: the rustling leaves, the crackling of the logs, the quiet murmurs of the other campers. It was as though he was beginning to see everything through a new lens, recognizing how patience had played a part in every step he had taken so far. "Tomorrow's another day," Eli said, standing up and stretching his stiff muscles. "We'll face something different, but we'll be ready. As long as we remember what we've learned today, patience, trust, and unity, we'll be fine." Louise stood with him, the two of them looking out across the campgrounds. "Yeah, tomorrow, we'll be ready." The next morning, after a restless night of deep contemplation, Eli woke early, just as the first rays of sunlight pierced the horizon. His mind was still processing the events of the previous day, but it was clear to him now he had learned something valuable. The patience and endurance he had gained weren't just about surviving the paintball games. They were about becoming the kind of person who could face life's struggles head-on, without wavering, without losing hope. As Eli walked to the mess hall to join the others for breakfast, he felt a quiet sense of determination. The camp had tested him in ways he hadn't expected, but now he felt ready for whatever challenge came next. He sat down at the table with his fellow campers, feeling the camaraderie that had begun to form over the past few days. The conversations around him were lighthearted, but there was an underlying strength to the group. It wasn't just about who was the fastest or the most skilled at paintball anymore. It was about something deeper. It was about perseverance. As the day's activities began, Eli found himself more attuned to his surroundings. His movements were more deliberate, his thoughts sharper. He could sense the connections between himself and the others, recognizing that each person brought something valuable to the table, whether it was patience, skill, or teamwork. The camp had become a place not only to learn tactics, but to learn who they were deep down. By the time they were geared up and standing in line for the next drill, Eli felt ready. It was no longer just about winning. It was about embracing the process, the journey, and allowing it to shape him into someone who could endure whatever life threw his way. As the whistle blew and the game began, Eli's body moved with a new kind of confidence. His patience wasn't just a waiting game anymore. It was a power, a strength, a belief in himself and the people around. Chapter 6, The Game Within the Game. As the days passed, Eli began to notice something subtle but significant. The paintball games, with their high intensity and constant action, had started to shift from pure competition to something deeper, a metaphor for life itself. Every time they took the field, they weren't just facing off against the other team, they were facing their own fears, doubts, and weaknesses. They were forced to confront their patience, their decision-making, and their ability to work under pressure. It was becoming clear that each game, each challenge, was an opportunity for growth. No longer was it about simply getting the best shots or outmaneuvering the opponent. It was about becoming a better version of themselves, about refining their character as much as their skills. One afternoon, as Eli sat on the sidelines, catching his breath after a particularly grueling round, Coach Stevens approached him. The coach had been an enigmatic figure, distant and intense, but Eli had grown to respect him. The man had a way of speaking that made you feel like every word held weight. "You've been doing well," Coach Stevens said, sitting down beside Eli. "I've noticed a change in you. You're not just playing anymore. You're thinking." Eli looked over at the coach, surprised by the observation. He hadn't realized that his focus had shifted, but now that Coach Stevens pointed it out, he understood. He had stopped focusing on the chaos of the game and started thinking about the bigger picture, how his actions fit into the team's strategy, how every move had consequences. "I've been trying," Eli said, still catching his breath. "It's not easy, though. There's so much going on out there. It's easy to get lost in the heat of the moment." "That's the key," Coach Stevens replied, his voice steady. "Staying calm in the chaos. Patience isn't just about waiting, it's about being present in the moment and making smart decisions, even when the pressure is on." Eli nodded, taking in the coach's words. It was like everything he had learned up to that point, the importance of patience, trust, and unity, was culminating in this understanding. He wasn't just playing the game. He was learning how to live it, how to embrace the chaos without losing himself in it. Later that evening, after another long day of drills and games, Eli gathered with the others around the campfire. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows across their faces, but there was a warmth in their camaraderie. thoughtful. I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day about patience. I think I get it now. It's not just about being slow or waiting. It's about being deliberate with your choices. It's about taking your time to make the right decision, even when everything's rushing around you. Eli turned to him, impressed by the shift in his friend's thinking. Exactly. It's not about sitting back and doing nothing. It's about having control over your decisions. It's about making sure that every move counts, that you're not just reacting, but acting with intention. Luis smiled, nodding slowly. I think I've been too focused on the immediate results. I want to win, but I've been going about it all wrong. I've been rushing things, trying to force it. That's where we get caught, Eli said. You can't force things. You can't rush the process. In paintball and in life, patience is what gives you clarity. It lets you see the bigger picture. The two sat in companionable silence for a moment, each reflecting on their own journey. What had once felt like a frustrating and pointless camp had turned into a transformative experience. They weren't just learning about paintball, they were learning about life. The next morning, Eli woke up with a new sense of purpose. The sun was still low in the sky, casting a soft golden light over the camp. He felt different, clearer, more focused. The lessons of the past few days had begun to sink in, and they weren't just about patience and strategy. They were about resilience, about weathering the storm and still finding a way to move forward. As the campers gathered for another day of drills, Eli found himself eager to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The uncertainty that had once made him anxious now felt like a challenge to embrace, a chance to test his patience and determination. He knew that every moment of pressure was an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to become stronger. And so, as the whistle blew and the game began, Eli moved with a new sense of purpose. His steps were more deliberate, his movements more focused. He didn't rush into the game with reckless abandon. Instead, he waited, watching, calculating. He was patient, and it made all the difference. With each passing round, Eli felt more and more at peace with the game, and with himself. He wasn't just playing to win anymore. He was playing to grow. The battlefield had become a mirror, reflecting his inner strengths and weaknesses, forcing him to confront them, to evolve. The other campers noticed the change in him too. They watched as Eli moved with confidence, his decisions sharp and precise. He wasn't the fastest or the most aggressive player, but his ability to stay calm under pressure, to make the right calls when it mattered most, made him a valuable asset to the team. By the end of the week, as the final day of camp approached, Eli felt a sense of completion, not because the games were over, but because he had accomplished something far more meaningful. He had learned the true essence of patience, not as a passive act, but as an active choice. He had learned to trust the process, to trust the people around him, and, most importantly, to trust himself. And as he sat around the campfire that final evening, surrounded by the friends he had made, Eli knew that this experience had changed him. It wasn't just about paintball anymore. It was about life. The fire crackled and popped as the camp slowly settled into silence, each camper lost in their own thoughts. The stars above shone brightly in the clear night sky, a reminder that no matter where they were, no matter what challenges they faced, the journey was far from over. Eli knew that the lessons learned here would stay with him long after the camp ended. He had learned to be patient in the face of adversity, to trust in the process, and to find strength in unity. As the embers of the fire burned low, Eli smiled to himself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to test his patience and perseverance. But he was ready. Chapter 7, The Final Test. The morning of the final day at the paintball camp arrived, and the air was thick with anticipation. The campers had been training hard, pushing their limits, learning from their mistakes, and growing in ways they hadn't imagined when they first arrived. The final game would be different. It wouldn't just be a test of physical endurance or tactical skill. This would be a test of everything they had learned during their time at the camp: patience, strategy, teamwork, and resilience. Eli stood at the edge of the field, feeling the cool morning breeze on his face. The dew on the grass shimmered in the early light, and the sounds of distant chatter filled the air as campers began to gather. Today's game would be the culmination of everything they had been working toward. Today's the big day, Luis said, appearing beside him. His voice held an excited edge, but there was also a quiet understanding between them, a recognition of the challenge they were about to face. Eli nodded, glancing across the field. He could see the other campers gearing up, checking their gear, adjusting their paintball markers. The final game was always intense, but this year, it felt different. The lessons they had learned over the course of the camp had transformed the way they saw the game. It's not just about shooting, Eli said, his voice steady. It's about thinking, staying calm. Patience is going to be everything. Luis grinned. You've got this. You've been preparing for this moment since the first drill. The coach had split the campers into two teams, and Eli was placed on the red team alongside Luis, Maya, and a few other skilled players. The blue team, their opponents, had been just as formidable, and Eli knew they would give them a run for their money. As the whistle blew, signaling the start of the game, Eli felt his heart rate increase. His mind, however, was calm. He was focused, not on the adrenaline of the moment, but on the lessons he had learned. He knew that the key to success wasn't rushing in blindly, it was about waiting for the right moment, staying aware of his surroundings, and making every move count. The red team began to advance, moving cautiously through the thick underbrush. Eli stayed near the back of the formation, his eyes scanning the field. Every noise, every rustle of leaves, every movement, he took it all in, understanding that each bit of information was vital. Luis moved ahead, leading the charge, while Maya and the others flanked the sides. Eli remained alert, waiting for any signs of the blue team. It wasn't long before they heard the first shots fired, a burst of paint splattering against a nearby tree. The game was underway, and the competition was fierce. But Eli didn't react immediately. He remained patient, waiting for the next move. His training had taught him that rushing into action without a clear plan often led to disaster. He needed to wait for the right opportunity, to see the patterns in the chaos, and then strike decisively. For what seemed like an eternity, there was nothing but the occasional pop of paintballs hitting trees and the soft rustling of the wind. It was a moment of stillness before the storm. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Eli saw a flash of movement, one of the blue team members sprinting across the open field, trying to get into a better position. Without hesitation, Eli raised his paintball marker, aimed carefully, and fired. The ball soared through the air and hit its target with a satisfying splash of paint. The opposing player was out. It was a small victory, but it was a moment of confirmation. Patience had paid off. By waiting for the right shot, Eli had made the first successful move of the game. The red team pressed on, and the game intensified. Paintballs zipped through the air, and the once calm battlefield became a frenetic war zone. Yet, through all the chaos, Eli remained focused. Every decision, every move he made was deliberate. He didn't let the pressure overwhelm him. He relied on the lessons of the camp, trusting in his training and his teammates. As the game wore on, it became clear that the red team had the upper hand. The blue team was relentless, but their rush decisions and impulsive moves gave them away. Eli and his team had learned to think before acting, to make their moves count, and it was paying off. With a final push, the red team overwhelmed the blue team's last remaining players. As the final whistle blew, signaling the end of the game, Eli stood in the center of the field, breathless but proud. They had won, but it wasn't just the victory that felt important, it was everything they had learned along the way. Coach Stevens approached the group, a rare smile on his face. "Well done," he said, his voice carrying a note of pride. "Today wasn't just about winning. It was about proving that you've learned the most important lesson of all, patience and persistence. You all worked as a team, and you trusted the process. That's what makes you champions." Eli felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond the victory. He had come into the camp unsure of himself, unsure of his abilities, and uncertain about what he could accomplish. But now, he understood. It wasn't about being the best or winning at all costs. It was about the journey, the process of growth, of becoming a better version of yourself. As the campers gathered for the final ceremony, Eli's thoughts turned inward. He knew the lessons of the camp would stay with him long after he left. The world beyond the paintball field would present new challenges, and he would face them with the same patience and perseverance he had learned here. He wasn't just a better paintball player, he was a better person. Chapter 8, The Next Challenge. As the final campfire burned low that kept his thoughts alive. It was the realization that this camp had done more than teach him how to win. It had taught him how to endure, how to stay calm when everything around him was in chaos, and how to lead without needing to be the loudest or the fastest. But deep down, Eli knew that this was only one part of his journey. Winning the final game was just a small chapter in the story of life. He had learned valuable skills in patience, focus, and strategy, but there was more to learn. Life was full of unexpected twists, and the patience he had cultivated in paintball would soon be tested in ways he hadn't yet imagined. The next morning, Eli woke up early. The sky was still dark, the stars glittering like tiny pinpricks in the night. It was a quiet, cold morning, and the camp was still asleep. He slipped out of his tent and wandered towards the field, where the dew was still fresh on the grass. As he walked across the field, he thought about what Coach Stevens had said about patience. It wasn't just about playing a game, it was about how to approach every challenge in life. His thoughts drifted back to his family, back home. They'd always told him that patience was a virtue, but it wasn't until he had experienced it in action, while crouched behind a barricade, waiting for the right moment to strike, that he had fully understood it. Patience wasn't just an idea, it was a practice, something you had to commit to every day. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Hey, Eli." He turned to see Luis approaching, wearing a half smile, his eyes still tired from the late-night celebration. "You up early?" Eli asked, stretching his arms above his head. "Couldn't sleep," Luis replied, sitting down beside him. "Been thinking a lot about everything we learned. You ever feel like it's just the beginning?" Eli looked at him thoughtfully. "Yeah, actually. I mean, we've only scratched the surface, right? This was just a camp. There's a whole world beyond these woods, and it's not going to be easy. But I think we're better prepared for it than we were when we first got here." Luis chuckled. "You're right. I think we've got the tools now. I just hope I don't forget them when the real world hits." Eli nodded in agreement. He understood that feeling. It was one thing to practice patience and persistence in the controlled environment of a camp, but it was another thing entirely to apply those lessons when life threw challenges at you. When the stakes were higher and the consequences were real. "Well, the way I see it," Eli said, "the patience we've learned here won't just apply to paintball. It's about dealing with everything that comes at us. Life's not going to wait for us to be ready. It's going to keep moving forward, no matter what." Luis was silent for a moment, considering Eli's words. Finally, he smiled. "I guess the key is taking it one step at a time, right? No matter how crazy it gets, just remember to keep moving." Eli grinned back at him. "Exactly. Don't rush it. Trust yourself, trust the process, and Chapter 10, A Test of Patience." As the months passed, Eli found that life often tested the very lessons he had learned during the paintball camp. The real world had a way of presenting challenges that were far more complex than anything he had encountered in a controlled environment. But he didn't back down. The Patience Project team grew stronger with each day, as they applied the principles of patience and resilience to their daily lives. One evening, as Eli sat with Luis at their usual spot on the porch, a situation arose that would put everything they had learned to the test. "Eli," Luis began, his voice serious, "I've been thinking a lot about our team, about what we're trying to build. But I feel like we're hitting a wall. We've been practicing patience, but I'm not sure we're making any real progress." Eli looked at him, feeling the weight of his words. "I get what you mean. Sometimes, it feels like no matter how hard we try, life keeps throwing curveballs. But I think that's exactly the point. The test isn't whether things get easier, but how we respond when things get tough." Luis was quiet for a moment. "But what if we're doing all this and still failing? What if we're not really making a difference?" Eli could see the frustration in his friend's eyes, the doubt creeping in. He knew exactly what Luis was feeling. There had been moments, too, when Eli questioned the progress they had made. It was hard to stay patient in a world that often seemed impatient with everything. "You remember what Coach Stevens said?" Eli asked. "That the trying of our faith worketh patience. It's not about winning right away. It's about enduring, no matter how long it takes. Patience doesn't happen overnight. It's a muscle that needs to be built over time." Luis just nodded slowly, the words sinking in. Yeah, I remember that. I guess I just wish we could see more immediate results. Eli smiled and placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. The results will come, but not right away. And that's okay. The most important thing is that we're not giving up. We're in this for the long haul. Just then, a knock came at the door. Eli opened it to find his younger sister, Hannah, standing there, her face grim. Eli, she said, her voice urgent. It's Mom. She's in the hospital. They say it's serious. Eli's heart dropped. He didn't hesitate for a second. Let's go, he said, grabbing his jacket and running out the door with Luis following close behind. Chapter 11, The Ultimate Test. The hospital was chaotic, but Eli's focus remained sharp. His mother had been in and out of the hospital for years due to complications with her heart, but this time, the situation felt different. They took her into surgery almost immediately. Eli stood in the waiting room, his thoughts racing. His mind flashed back to the lessons of the camp, patience in the face of adversity, trusting the process, not rushing the outcome. But it was hard to put those lessons into practice when he was staring down the possibility of losing someone he loved. The uncertainty felt unbearable. Luis, noticing his discomfort, placed a hand on Eli's back. You doing okay? Eli nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. It's just hard to be patient with something like this. I get it, Luis replied softly. Remember what we talked about. Patience isn't just for the small things. It's for the big things too. It's about trusting that whatever happens, we can handle it, one step at a time. Eli swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. I know. It's just, I don't know if I'm ready for this. Luis didn't say anything more. He just stood beside Eli, offering his silent support. They didn't need words in that moment. Eli felt the strength of his friend's presence, a reminder that he wasn't alone. After what felt like an eternity, the doctor finally came out. His face was somber, and for a moment, Eli's heart sank. But then the doctor spoke. She's stable, the doctor said. It was a close call, but she's going to pull through. A wave of relief washed over Eli, and he collapsed into a chair, overcome with emotion. He hadn't realized how much the weight of uncertainty had been pressing on him until that moment. Luis sat beside him, his voice steady. See? We made it through. We were patient, and we trusted the process. Eli nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. I guess patience isn't just about waiting. It's about having faith, even when you can't see the outcome. Chapter 12, The Full Circle. As the months went by, Eli's mother recovered, and life slowly returned to its normal rhythm. The Patience Project continued to thrive, and Eli found that the lessons he had learned were shaping every aspect of his life. He had become more patient with his family, more understanding with his friends, and more resilient in the face of the challenges that came his way. One day, as he was reflecting on everything he had experienced, Eli received a message from Coach Stevens. It was a simple note, but it carried weight. Remember, the message read, patience doesn't mean inactivity. It means persistence in the face of obstacles. Keep moving forward. You're on the right path. Eli smiled as he read the words. He had learned so much since the camp, the true meaning of patience, the power of resilience, and the importance of perseverance. He was no longer the same person who had arrived at that camp, unsure of what lay ahead. He had grown, learned, and evolved. As he sat down to write in his journal, he thought about everything that had happened. About the challenges he had faced and the lessons he had learned. About the people who had supported him, and the ones he had supported in return. He had started this journey thinking that patience was just a virtue, something to be practiced in small doses. But now, he understood that it was more than that.